Hi, in this screencast, we'll be talking about the Enlightenment, a very important movement in Europe that has a tremendous impact on the development of the United States of America. In this PowerPoint, we'll be looking at the thinkers, which are known as the Philosophes, and the various theories that they had about the government itself. So let's go ahead and get started. So to set the stage here for the Enlightenment, it's important to understand some of the other bigger things that are happening in Europe where things are being questioned. So for instance, we had the scientific revolution where people are actually looking at the nature of the universe and Earth's role in it and discrediting this theory that had existed since the time of the Greeks that Earth was the center of the universe. This has tremendous implications because, one, people are questioning hugely assumed things about the world in which we live in terms of people, but also, two, it challenges a lot of key teachings of the church, which will have some ripple effects, too, when we look at the Reformation. So once people are looking at science and they're looking at universe and they're looking at preconceived notions and things that had been accepted as inviolable truths, what's going to happen now during the Enlightenment then is going to be taking this idea of questioning and applying it to people, applying it to governments, and applying to the relationship between the two. And so the Enlightenment itself will take place between 1650 and 1800. It starts in England, it spreads to France, but there's going to be thinkers from many other countries involved here as well, who are known as the Philosophes. So these Philosophes or thinkers are really going to be looking at the political and economic and social interactions of people, of societies, and of countries. And remember, in the 18th century, the relationship of government and people is that people are pretty insignificant, and their job is to serve the government. And many times it's going to be a monarch, whether it's an absolute monarch or a constitutional monarch or an emperor or sultan or what have you. There really isn't a lot of say for an individual or a lot of rights or privileges. And so what the Philosophes will do then is look at maybe, switching the relationship here, flipping the tables, and looking at the way that people could actually be served by the government instead, and hopefully have a better life. So one of the first Philosophes we're going to be seeing here is going to be Thomas Hobbes, who is British. And he really has a negative view of humanity. And his negative view of humanity is going to play out very much in his theories. Since people are seen as being naturally bad, and if you give a person a chance to do something, they'll probably do the wrong thing in Hobbes' point of view, the idea here then is we need to really have a way to keep people in check and keep their nastiness away from each other. And so for that reason, when we look at Thomas Hobbes, he really believes in this idea of an absolute monarch, someone that can crack some heads, can keep people in order, and to keep from chaos and anarchy from spreading everywhere. So if you look at Hobbes, he really does not want people to have rights. He doesn't really want to see freedom. He just wants to see order. The opposite of Thomas Hobbes is going to be John Locke, who is British. And just as Hobbes looks at everyone being negative and bad, Locke looks at the goodness of people. And he really sees that if you give people a chance to do the right thing, they probably will. If you think about commentary in society, a lot of times we talk about how people are bad, society is bad, and, people can't be trusted. But when we have things like natural disasters or tragedies that strike, it's really amazing to see how people do come together and how they do work together and how they cooperate and they share and they participate in ways that they normally wouldn't. Someone like John Locke would really embrace that and feel good about this and really show that while humanity certainly does have issues, people are inherently good. And so for this reason then, with John Locke, he believes in this idea of, having a government that serves people and really protects the goodness of humanity and the goodness of people and their rights. And what he's going to call for then is what's going to be known as natural rights. He's going to call them life, liberty, and property. The idea that the government should be able to do things to keep and protect you and keep you safe. Should be able to keep your property safe. If you have a house or a car, people shouldn't take it. You should have some sort of protections. As well as liberty, the idea that you should be able to be free to do what you like to do and not be told no. If you tell people yes more than no, people are probably going to do the right thing and they're going to feel better about it. Locke also believes that the government needs to protect these rights, and if the government can't protect the rights of an individual, then the government's a pretty crummy government and needs to get rid of it. Locke also believes that all men are equal before the eyes of the law, although not necessarily equal between each other. And so, again, with John Locke, we're looking at the relationship of government to people, and government should be treating people, or law should be treating people just the same, while society may not be doing the same thing. This is pretty important here when we look at John Locke because his thinkings of life, liberty, and property are going to very, very closely resonate within the American Declaration of Independence, where Jefferson pens life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness as more of a euphemism for that idea of property, which was kind of controversial during this time. The third philosopher that we'll be looking at here is going to be Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And Rousseau is living in a time in the 1700s when you have European explorers in North America, and they're on the edges of society and civilization, if you will. where you'll have explorers and missionaries and that are interacting with indigenous peoples, Native Americans. And Rousseau, among other thinkers, is going to start looking at this idea of primitive man. And by that, he means people who don't live in civilization actually live a better life than civilization does. For this reason of society really corrupts people. If you think about the idea of a little infant baby, babies are naturally good. What causes these nice little innocent babies to turn into bad or dysfunctional people? Usually it's a society that messes them up or something. So Rousseau would really be thinking more in that line of people being spoiled by a society and living in a place where you don't have this idea of civilization and society per se. They would actually live a pretty natural, kind, and good life. So Rousseau really gets hung up on this idea of a social contract, this idea that we need to have a relationship between everyone of how we act and how we interact. And a lot of times that social contract that we have are like those unwritten rules that we have. So, if I drive on the highway, the social contract is you stay on your side of the yellow line, I'll stay on my side of the yellow line, and we can both drive without having tragedy on a highway. When we go into elevators, when we go into buildings, there's certain ways that we act, there's certain ways that we treat each other. And that really is indicative of a social contract that exists in a place. And of course, if you go to a different country or region of the world, they might have a different practice because that's just what they do. So Rousseau is going to embrace this idea of the purity of uncivilized man, this idea of a social contract that needs to occur. And he really feels that democracy would be the best form of government because it's going to allow for people to have that interaction, that debate, and that discussion in order to find the best way to rule and be ruled, and hopefully not be as corrupting as people could be. Voltaire is a French philosophe, and Voltaire is actually a pen name or nom de plume, where it was really just taken for him to write his works. And Voltaire himself is a very bitingly sarcastic person. He really dislikes the idea of church control. He really doesn't like this idea of a strong king that is absolute like it was in France. And rather what Voltaire wants to do is he wants to see this development of an enlightened despot, someone that is powerful and powerful enough, but someone that can look at the bigger picture and be willing to do the right thing by people while keeping that control. So a wonderful example of an enlightened despot would, of course, be your loving history teacher. While your teacher wants you to think and develop and learn and have an opinion and develop these thoughts, you also see these enlightened despots want to keep some sort of order so learning can occur for people as a whole. We are going to see with Voltaire a very famous statement of, I maybe disagree with what you have to say, but I'll die for your right to say it. Voltaire really believes in a beautiful argument and a discourse to find the idea of truth and what right or what wrong is. And for this reason, he is a cool philosophe. Lastly, we'll see Cesare Beccaria, who's an Italian. And he really looks at this idea of crime and punishment, the idea that you have the rights of the accused that need to be protected. And he's really against torture and capital punishment and unequal treatment because of wealth. Beccaria really wants to see justice, but also humanity as it relates to punishments for people, because in a sense, it's kind of hypocritical to kill someone for killing. It's kind of like, yelling at the kids to stop yelling as you're yelling at the kids. It just doesn't quite work right. The Baron de Montesquieu is going to be a French philosophe, and he's really going to be looking at the merits and the beauty of an indirect democracy or a republic, something like along the lines of what the Roman Empire had. The idea here with a republic is that you have individual citizens. They're going to be voting in mass for a leader or leaders or representative who then do the day-to-day work of the government itself. This is nice because when you have that specialization and focus, you're going to have well-qualified people for it. But at the same time, you're going to have people that are beholden to a population or a democracy, and they need to answer their constituents or the people who vote for them. What Montesquieu also looks at is this idea of balance of power. It's dangerous when you live and die by one person. If you have a crummy king, you have a crummy problem. If you have a great king, then everything's fantastic. But that's a very dangerous way to live as a country or as a government. And so for this reason, then, what Montesquieu wants to do is divide up the various tasks and responsibility of government and balance them out into three different groups. And this is going to be known as a system of checks and balances, this idea where if you take the different aspects of laws and legality and farm it out amongst the different branches of government, everyone's keeping everyone else honest. So for instance, you have an executive branch, which could be a king or a president, a mayor, a governor, prime minister. And really the job of the executive branch is to execute or enforce the laws that are set. The legislature, whether it's Parliament in England or Congress in the United States, should be responsible for creating the laws. And since they really represent the people, it's going to be representing things that are going to be true to the people's values. And when you have a lot of eyes and hands on the creation of a law, hopefully you have something that's equitable and just that works for a lot of people. To be fair, sometimes legislatures make illegal laws, and so it's the role of the courts to make sure that the laws are actually legal. They can interpret the laws, they can look at existing laws and make sure there's no conflict. By separating out these powers along these checks and balances, you ensure that there's always going to be a safety valve against one branch and the other. Lastly, we're going to be looking at the dimension of women, because we talk about the equality of men and all men being equal, but where's the ladies here? We got to get them involved too. So Mary Wollstonecraft's a philosopher, and she really looks at this idea of women's suffrage, the right to vote. And unfortunately, in the 18th century, no one's very interested. It's not going to be the early 20th century that women actually do get the right to vote. So to sum up here, these philosophers have really interesting ways of looking at society. And when we look at life in the United States of America, it's important to keep that in mind. We have people who have different attitudes and views towards the goodness and badness of people, and they have different beliefs about who should be in charge and why. These philosophers give us a lot of insight about how this can be. Thanks for watching.